Thank you, Nigel. Inspiring, energetic, and a call to arms once again, as ever. I'm going to take some questions now from the media in the room. I'm afraid it has to be the media, if I may. So I've got a few questions now. If someone wants to ask a question, will they put up their hands? And I'll come to you in turn from those. So if you could give your name and the institution you're part of.
David Maddox from the Daily Express. And that's a rare thing for a journalist. Just on next week, Nigel. Just wanted a few words on how you're preparing for the showdown with David Cameron, and whether you think you can seal the deal next week and finish him off after his mangling last night.
How am I preparing? Well, as I always prepare, clean, healthy living, which is a very important part of what I do. No, actually, do you know something? I think that next week got a bit easier for me last night. We had the Prime Minister telling us that we could maintain, controls on immigration numbers whilst remaining part of the EU. Not true. We had the Prime Minister effectively telling us that we got a wonderful deal from France because after 4 years of wrangling, they started buying British beef again, whereas the Americans wouldn't buy our beef, without telling us that we won't buy the Americans' beef. And then, best of all, top of the pops, we got a Prime Minister who for 10 years has been the most vocal supporter of Turkey joining the European Union. I will fight, he said, for Turkish membership of the European Union. I will pave the road from Ankara to Brussels. He said it again and again for 10 years, and in response to a question from the audience, he said, "We have a veto." Yes, Prime Minister, but not one you would ever intend to use. And I think this sheer level of dishonesty and deception says to me that I only have to do one thing next week. All I have to do next week is tell the truth, because the British public are ready to hear it.
Okay, David, we'll see if there's someone else who's going to get just as big a clap as yourself after that. So the task has fallen to you. Come on, everyone, a big clap for this one. Sorry, sir, if your name and your organisation.
William James from Reuters.
Thank you, William.
Thank you. You mentioned it in your speech that you've now got senior Tories, Boris, Michael Gove, parroting your ideas. Just interested in how that feels for you as someone who's tackled the political establishment and taken it on, to have them adopt your ideas. Is that a positive as you see it? And also, what role does that leave for UKIP post-referendum?
Well, I don't think that Boris Johnson and Michael Gove are parroting my ideas. I think they're converts. I know, I really do. I think they're converts. They've got it. They've gone outside the M25. They've met some real people going around the country. You know, rather fewer Notting Hill dinner parties. And I even saw them the other day having a pint in a pub. I can't imagine where that came from. I really can't. So, what do I think? Do you know, I'll answer both your questions in one. The day that David Cameron gave the Bloomberg speech, a lot of people said, well, you must be very disappointed, Nigel, because it isn't just you and UKIP that are saying this now. The Prime Minister's saying this now. And the need for UKIP has evaporated. They said the UKIP fox had been shot. They kept on saying it. I thought perhaps foxes were going to become an endangered species. And yet what happened after the Bloomberg speech? Effectively, what the Prime Minister did was to validate and put into the mainstream everything we'd been condemned for with our comments about the European Union. And indeed, that helped propel us to winning the European elections of 2014. We have taken this issue, received shed loads of abuse. It is now at the centre mainstream of the national political debate. And I couldn't be more thrilled that that is where we are, because that will win us this referendum. And what happens afterwards to the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or UKIP, important though that may be, is as nothing to me as getting back control of my country. That's what really matters to me.
As a wolf, Nigel, when you mention the foxes being endangered species, I do get a little worried. Thank you, William. I hope you are now a convert. We have another question as well from the media. Sorry, I'm hiding in the corner. There's a lovely warm seat down here at the front. Okay. Your name and organisation, please.
Dan Bloom from the Daily Mirror.
Thanks. Oh, come on. It's not a pantomime, he's a nice lad.
You did.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You said that David Cameron is painting the single market like a cuddly puppy, I think you said it was. How can you guarantee that what's going to happen after Brexit is going to be as cuddly and that there aren't going to be trade tariffs?
Well, the great myth about the single market, the great myth about our EU deal, is that somehow we've got a good deal. Look, what did we vote for? What did this country endorse back in 1975? Simple as we voted for tariff-free access to a market, having gone through decades of very high tariffs on manufactured goods. What we got on top of that was political union. Few voters who voted yes in 75 understood that European law would be supreme, that Parliament would not be able to make all of our laws, that our own highest court could be overruled in Luxembourg, that we would finish up with immigration uncontrollable and on a scale that we never understood. Few understood that it meant that for the 88% of the British economy that does not export goods and services to Europe, they would have to obey the letter of every single regulation and directive. And the point I'm making, I nearly forgot. And for all of that, a net membership fee of £34 million a day. Whatever the benefits 40 years ago of joining a club that gave us tariff-free access to that market, those so-called benefits are now more than outweighed by all of the costs that I've just listed. And the idea that France and Germany would not want to continue selling to what is now their biggest export market in the world is frankly unthinkable. BMW and Audi will want to go on selling their cars in this country as competitively as they possibly can. My favourite Bordeaux producer will not want to lose my custom. But even if, okay, let's take the worst case scenario. Even if they decided they would cut off their noses to spite their faces, even if Hollande and Merkel decided they were quite happy to lose their national elections next year, and we emerged at the end of the 2-year process with no deal, but continuing under World Trade Organization rules would be better and cheaper for this country where we currently are. The worst case possible scenario is better than where we are today. And I want to say one last thing, that there is far too much obsession with trade with Europe. What about trade with the rest of the world? And we'll be free to make our own arrangements.
Okay, one more gentleman at the back next to Dan.
Ian Silvera from the International Business Times. Nigel, you sort of outlined that Vote Leave has switched to an immigration argument. Do you think that's because they've lost the economic argument in this campaign?
No, I don't. I have to say, I mean, look, I said earlier that I thought that Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and all the others were genuine converts. They are, you know, and British politics has changed. The centre of gravity has moved this week. And I praise Vote Leave for moving on to this agenda. Some of us might have got there a bit more quickly, but I praise them for getting there. I think on the economics of it, if I can be mildly critical, they haven't been robust enough. Yes, it's quite right to say that Cameron is scaremongering. It's quite right to say that the Treasury are producing forecasts based on really very false economic models. It's quite right to say that the overpaid failures at the IMF and the OECD and the people who get everything wrong, their voices frankly aren't worth listening to. But I think we need to fight back on the economics very much more robustly, and I think I just did that with your colleague from the Daily Mirror.
Okay. I can take one more question. So is the sorry, so there's a gentleman down in the corner. I've seen an arm. Is there anyone else? Let's see.
Mr. Farage, I know there's been
I will take one more over there.
a plethora of acronyms in recent times talking about wanting against Brexit. The CPA is the latest one. The Cornish Pasty Association have this morning come out and said they're against Brexit because they don't believe they've seen any evidence that Britain outside Europe, their protection for Cornish pasties would continue. Can you give them that guarantee?
Well, I have to say, the Cornish pasty is very high on my wish list. Look, let me tell you what's going on here. There was, on the BBC News, 2 days ago, there was a piece about trade after Brexit and what would happen to food prices. Now, the simple fact, and I mean fact, is that as part of a customs union, importing goods from outside is more expensive. A Japanese motor car has a 10% premium. Food that we buy from Africa or anywhere else in the world is very much more expensive than it should be. And yet, the BBC on the 6 o'clock news had an independent expert on. Gosh, I thought, isn't that good? She came from Cambridge University, but it turned out with a little bit of research that she was the chair of a department that was part of the Jean Monnet professorship scheme, taking funding from the European Union. And then yesterday I look at the newspaper. There's an article by the chief executive of the RSPB and the chief executive of the World Wildlife Fund, telling us how wonderful the EU had been for nature. But nowhere did they declare an interest. Nowhere did they tell us that both organisations are in receipt of large sums of EU funding. So whenever I hear any organisation saying they support continued membership, I ask the question, are they being funded by the EU, or does their chairman expect an OBE, a knighthood, or a peerage?
So there were two arms that went up at the same time, so I will take this as the last question. Name and organisation, please.
Rajdeep Sandhu from the BBC.
Oh, come on. Come on, let's all be friends here. That's it.
You said that you wouldn't measure immigration by GDP because you said money matters more than some other things.
I said money doesn't matter.
Money doesn't matter as much as others.
Yeah.
But what would be your alternative proposal to measure immigration?
Oh, what should immigration be? Well, look, we in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, until Mr. Blair got in. But for that whole post-war period, we had annual net migration averaging about 30,000 people a year. At that level, and given that most people that came from the Commonwealth, and we had a shared history and a shared language, frankly, by the mid-1990s, there was actually no debate. There was no political debate about immigration in the general elections of 1992 and 1997. It was a non-issue. I stood for UKIP in 1997, and in my election address, the word immigration wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be, because we were going along at a normal, sensible, acceptable rate that worked, and it brought a level of diversity that people thought was good. And it certainly improved the food in this country immeasurably. So that was good. It was a happy situation. Now what we've got is completely out of control. And I think what we should aim for, but I do insist it should be Parliament that debates this and sorts this out so they can be accountable to the voters. I think we should aim to return to post-war normality. If net migration into Britain was at 30, 40,000 a year, that sort of number, and if the people that were coming had trades and skills to bring, it was checked they hadn't got criminal records, and they were prepared to bring health insurance to cover them for the first few years, this country then this country would be at ease with itself about levels of immigration, and we would then have a big job to assimilate what we've taken in over the last few years, but we would solve this problem, and in 10 years' time, I hope we'd never have to discuss the subject again. But we can't do it. As members of the European Union, that penny has dropped with the British public, and it's dropped with the Prime Minister, and it's why we're now going to win this referendum.
Okay. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That will be the end of this conference and speech. I want to thank all of you for coming. For those who are supporters, I want you to remember the positive message that you've heard from Nigel this morning, that this is a country that is on the up, that we will have opportunities outside of the world. We'll be able to trade with our neighbours to the right, to the left and the centre. We can have a country that we can call our own, be proud of the past, but also proud of the future. Let's just get out there, make sure that the clouds stay over David Cameron forever and ever, and leave the European Union. Thank you very much. Yeah, sorry.